Well, Peter, you got anything rolled up for today's show?
I'm glad you asked that because I just got back in the door and I do have some lovely pre-rolls that I was gifted from a good friend a few weeks ago. So I realized I'm going to celebrate at the very end with that if that's cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely cool. It's encouraged. Um, so, well, hey, give a quick introduction. This is your first time on the show. Introduce yourself to our audience.
For sure. So yeah, appreciate again you having me on. My name is Peter Contos. I'm the deputy director of the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition. We are a 501c3, 501c4 nonprofit organization. We formed in 2019, really working to make sure, we hold the state accountable for the harms done by the war on drugs, but ultimately to the goals of equity that, our lawmakers made, and our governor made back in 2018, 2019 about legalization. And so we're, an organization that does a variety of different programming around, direct community services like record clearing events. We have a holistic 12-week reentry fellowship program. But we also do a lot of know your rights education, making sure people understand, weed is legal, but it's really not legal, as well as, connecting that to things like political education and advocacy training. So once people learn, why is, the law is obviously messed up, but how did we get this way and why is it this way? And ultimately, how do we build a power? We need to uproot these laws and ultimately, build a state that is, and the folk, have been at, doing this work in the community for years.
Cool. Cool. Thank you. If you didn't say it, or if you did say it, my apologies. Did you mention a website or anything?
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, our social media, we're on all platforms at Canna Equity IL on all platforms again, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn on the same place. Facebook and YouTube, we have our press conference that we had earlier this morning. We're on there, at Canna Equity IL. YouTube, or sorry, Facebook is where the press conference currently lives. We'll make sure that gets on YouTube by the end of the week. And their
Sweet.
website is www.cannabisequityil.org. Cannabis is spelled out in the website, but not in the social media.
Cool. We'll put the website link in the podcast description for folks that, if that makes it easier on you all that are listening or watching. If you'd like to watch, it's chillinois.net/video to watch this version of the podcast. So, Peter, there was a press conference today. You just mentioned it. Um, Before we talk about the press conference, maybe we can talk about what's led up to this. I know there's been a lot of lobbying and everything. Maybe you can give a little bit of background, and then I'd be happy to share the graphics for the press conference, and we can go through what was discussed today.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And so, yeah, just some background on how we got here. So, again, the coalition we founded in 2019. As the lead up to legalization was happening, the writing was on the wall. This is coming to Illinois, whether we like it or not. Our lawmakers had, specifically House members had, town halls across the state where we talked about legalization. Um, you know, we took, 100 plus people down to Springfield back in 2019 to advocate for things like, automatic expungement, mass, commutations of sentences for folks who have cannabis records, as well as, investment into impacted communities and ultimately investment into entrepreneurs through grants. So these entrepreneurs have money to stand up their business. Fast forward a little bit, obviously, COVID hits, that changes the world, that seriously impacts the cannabis industry in Illinois because it helped start a couple of lawsuits it didn't lead to. But there's a couple lawsuits that were filed that um, ultimately everything kind of gets resolved in the summer of 2022, last summer. And so, in early 2022, the coalition, we connected with a variety of different community advocates, as well as all of our own internal members to say, hey, y'all, we realize legalization or cannabis legislation hasn't been addressed really since legalization. There was a HB 1443 that was passed in 2021 that cleaned a few things up, but ultimately, no substantial legislation has been addressed. And so we were in Springfield all of last year, January to April, because they're part-time employees. Separate conversation we could have. I could yell on that hill all day. There, January to April, making sure, hey, cannabis is important. People, the state is going to, ultimately lose entrepreneurs. We're going to lose tax revenue. Community members are still being, criminalized and stuff like that. And we were told at that time, hey, y'all, it's an election year. There's too many big things on the table. We'll come back later after the election. And we swallow our pride. We say, okay, if this is how it's going to have to be, we'll take it. And so we come back later in the year. There's a special session that happened in November of last year. called the veto session, where anything that had to be passed with a veto-proof majority. There was some kind of heavier topics discussed. There was some lighter topics, more like technical changes. But ultimately, we were down in Springfield saying, hey, y'all, you said you'd address this after the election. Here we are after the election. All of these people won their seats. The Democrats kept a supermajority. And so, most of the concerns were kind of weren't really that big of an issue because these people held their seats. And so they didn't pass the bills during the special session in November. We did a big press conference at that time. We took 50 plus people down to Springfield at that time, saying, hey, y'all, now is the time to pass this. And they let us down yet again. And so since that literally since that time over 6 months ago, we've been at the table with every community advocacy group we can find on the cannabis side, who's whether it's obviously the coalitions at the table, but Scenes, Chicago Normal, we have folks from the medical cannabis community at the table, awesome healthcare professionals like Katie Sullivan and Tiffany Reynolds with us, groups, trade associations like the Illinois Minority Cannabis Business Owners, as well as the Illinois Independent Craft Growers Association. So it's a wide variety of advocates from mostly Chicagoland and Northern Illinois, but we do have some folks in Central Illinois and downstate. But the goal is everybody is here under one agenda, under, banging the same drum, singing the same message, saying, hey, y'all, the cannabis industry in Illinois is an ecosystem. If we want this program to work, if we want the, promises of equity and justice that our lawmakers set out for, back in 2019, if we actually want those to come true, they have to listen to the people they said they would listen to, which is advocates like myself and our entire group, the folks who did the entire press conference this morning. And so we held this press conference today because again, we've been told time and again, oh yeah, just give us a little bit more time, we'll get this passed. We've written the bills, we've gotten the community members on board, we've educated members, from both the Senate and the House, from both sides of the aisle, from up and down Illinois, from Chicago to Carbondale. Making it clear, the hard part is over. Cannabis is already legal in Illinois. The controversial part is done. And now it's all about maximizing the opportunity that's in front of us, living up to the promises we made around equity and justice, and ultimately, if the state is serious, maximizing their tax revenue. Because we've learned that, the messaging that we use around what's the greater good and the promises, that's not what they listen to. They listen to tax revenue and, oh, we can, make some money if we do this. So we are changing our tune and trying to talk in their language. But ultimately we had this press conference today so that we could, really make it clear that they have 9 days left. 9 days. May 19th is when this legislative session ends. And if they don't get this done before then, they are telling business owners that they don't care that their businesses are failing. They're telling community members that, we do not care if you have a job or a career in this industry. And we're ultimately, just telling everybody in the state of Illinois, we don't even care about the tax revenue at this point because we're not willing to maximize what this industry could be.
I was just going to share the flyer for today's press conference because I felt like it outlined pretty succinctly some of the things that were discussed today. Do you want to go through? I know that you spoke on, I saw the thing after the fact on Instagram Live, and I saw that you spoke on the odor of cannabis, which, Peter, just before we get into this, thank you. You spoke on it very eloquently. I don't know if you're familiar with defense attorney Evan Bruno, but I believe he was involved in drafting some of the language for that bill, and he was on our show, and good person. And I just really have glammed onto that issue. So I want you to explain that issue for folks that aren't aware. Maybe we'll start with that since you spoke on that. And then would you be comfortable speaking on the other initiatives that were discussed today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can talk about all of them.
Cool.
And so, yeah, let's start with the criminalization side, because this is, to me, and I definitely think, listening to your program in the past, like, I think we agree on this, like, it's not legal if the cops can still criminalize you for things as trivial as, oh, well, he smells like weed to me, so I'm going to stop him. We have this situation where law enforcement in Illinois still has the authority to say somebody smells like weed, and that is enough to stop them, search their person, search their car, which can lead to, any number of different offenses and stuff like that. It's pretty straightforward. If weed's going to be legal, it has to be all the way legal. This is one of those really key things that has to get changed if we really want to embrace this as a legal substance. And so, what we're requesting is, in and what's been great is this bill did actually run by itself, Senate Bill 125, for anybody at home listening. It did run by itself. We expect this to actually get cut and pasted into this larger cannabis omnibus. So I am optimistic that it's going to move. If it passed the Senate, it can definitely pass the House. But it's just really about like moving this program forward in the direction of actual legalization. And that means holding cops to a higher standard. Like if I'm, acting erratically or demonstrating, I'm breaking a law, show me where I'm breaking the law, and like that is what it is. But we have to move away from a system where cops can just allege that, oh well, he smelled like weed, so I searched the bag and I found that knife that he had, or he had a second substance on him, and now he's facing automatic felony possession for simple drug possession. We just have to move away from the system of punitive punishments, and cannabis ultimately, this odor being the probable cause is really at the root of a lot of these issues that we face. And by moving forward on this, we can move us a little bit closer to the goal of justice and stopping criminalization, full stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that'll be one step closer to that. And we'll have more open discussion. But again, I want to kind of give you the opportunity to, right at the top of the podcast, while we have everybody's undivided attention, to talk about, what was discussed today in the press conference. So if you don't mind, I can display the graphic again if you'd like me to. Do you mind going through the rest of what was discussed?
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to pull up the graphic. And so everything else that was talked about, one other thing that I mentioned in the presser was around the badging conversation. So right now, if you do want to work in this industry or get own a license, you do have to get a background check. What we're seeing is people are being denied a badge in the state of Illinois. It's not actually because the state is denying them because of a background check. It's what we're hearing is the state is saying, hey, Peter has this class 4 felony from 2007. And we just think you should know because it came up on his background check. And these companies are then seeing that and saying, oh, Peter has a felony record that, he's not cut out to work with us. And really what we're looking to do here is really just clarify, one, from the state perspective, like if we're going to deny people because of a record, we want to be very clear, like what the state is okay with and not okay with. Because as an organization that does a lot of reentry services and record clearing and hands-on community services, we need to be able to communicate effectively, hey, y'all, you should apply for this job or you should not apply for this job. We want to make sure we're telling people the truth about what's actually accessible in the space. And so, this piece is really important just to make sure, again, people can work and own in this industry. This is, ultimately our lawmakers were the ones saying, hey, we should prioritize them when we legalize. Nobody forced them to do that. And so we just want to make sure we can hold them accountable to that. And then some of the other items that we talked about. So one of the couple pieces we have on the medical patient item, one is, right now, medical patients can only access the tax discount at the first 55 dispensaries. So you have folks driving hours away and so many miles just to get, medical cannabis. This plant is no different. It's still grown, it's green, and it smokes, or it's consumed in other ways. But because it's being sold out of non-medical dispensaries, these patients are literally forced to pass adult use dispensaries on their way to a medical shop. This is a super easy change. It's not going to be a devastating amount of taxing, revenue that we're going to miss out on as a state. And ultimately, this is about us, showing respect and dignity to our medical patients and making sure they can get, more easily and cost-effective medicine. Not to say that it is cost-effective, because it is still insanely expensive. We still have a lot of work to do on that side. We do want to make sure they can at least get some cheaper medicine closer to their home. And then, a couple items just on the business side. On the medical patients, last other item is curbside pickup. We don't want people to have to go anywhere, especially if they're immunocompromised. Let's move away from that. We've had curbside ever since COVID first hit. We've had, executive orders that put that into effect, but ultimately we need to codify that and make it permanent, because this is it's such an easy way to treat people with respect and dignity and make their medicine more accessible. There's literally not a good reason to do it. Not a good reason not to do it. And so
Right.
we got a couple of medical items on there. And then a few just business pieces that we want to bring up. One is on the craft growers. So we've worked with the Illinois Independent Craft Growers as one of the groups with the largest kind of collective of growers, to really get to the bottom of like, what is it that they're facing, what issues are they running into, and frankly, the truth is, it seems what's been presented to us is many of these companies will fail if they're not able to increase their canopy space. There was talk like even if 5,000 square feet of canopy space was competitive, even if COVID never hit and this didn't work out the way it did, But we're in the position now where, the multi-state operators are still the only companies with plants actually in the ground, harvesting those and selling those. These companies are going to face a huge uphill fight. They're still trying to get operational for the most part. I think we have 2 or 3 that are actually operational across Illinois. But really what this comes down to is giving these folks a little bit more support so they can ultimately get off the ground. Because our fear is they're not even going to be able to open their doors if they're not able to increase their canopy space. And so, we do want to see how we can get creative to give these folks a little bit more support. Because again, if these business licenses fail, the ecosystem is depleted, knowing that, we have 175 plus more dispensaries that are licensed but have yet to become operational. Like just those licenses need to be stocked. They need products to sell. And if the craft growers aren't there to support them, we're going to be in a very, very difficult position as for the dispensaries themselves, because they're going to really struggle. And we know that the price of cannabis is not going to decline for consumers. And so it's really going to be, it could end up very poorly if we don't get, again, the entire ecosystem addressed. And then one other item, just because, personally, I'm incredibly passionate about social consumption lounges. Everybody who's in our alliance can tell, it's literally heard me talk. I've talked everyone's ears off, and I'm like, why is this not the baby we're all running? And it's just, our lawmakers aren't ready. It's very upsetting that, they are still kind of behind on the game and what is actually happening, because these lounges and clubs and events, they happen all the time, everywhere. Now, obviously, Chicago is where a lot of events happen, but we've been to them in Peoria. We've seen them in East St. Louis. And we know they're happening across the state, because cannabis consumption is not something that just affects one big city. It's all over this darn state. And so social consumption is something I'm super passionate about. I really, really would love to see us move these lounges and events into operation ideally this year. Frankly, to me, if we can pass this in the next 9 days, the summertime is ready for us to have these licenses. But we're getting being told directly now that lawmakers are still a little too concerned about what this actually looks like. And I think it might be a little too far for us now. But again, we have everything else from the medical pieces to law enforcement and badging to craft grow, canopy space, and the sort. So there's a lot of pieces in there. There's a couple of other items just around like 280E taxes, trying to find some ways to create a little bit more, just flexibility for these businesses, knowing that, this is the highest tax burden of any business in the country. There's some other things like that are in there, but, those are the main points: supporting small businesses, supporting medical patients, ending criminalization, supporting people with records getting into the industry.
Excellent. Thank you for running through all that. Wanted to make sure to give, the airtime for that right at the top of the hour, because I know that, well, what is it? How many days are left? Not many, right?
9, literally 9.
9. So by the time people listen to this, maybe 8 or 7. So I'll ask you right now, and then we can just go into open discussion. What do people do that are listening right now and they look at the clock? Oh, well, first of all, what is the date? What is the last date?
So the last day of the Illinois legislative session is going to be Friday, May 19th.
Okay, thank you.
So end of day next Friday.
Yeah. And we've all heard this, so maybe this will be part of your answer. Contact your elected officials. Tell them to support what? What do we need to do to make this happen?
So what our call out is for everybody to, and I'm going to put a link into the chat here that we can make sure that we share out with folks. It's a bit.ly link that's bit.ly/outreach help.
Perfect.
Capital O, capital H. And this included on this document is a way for you to find your elected official. So you just plug in your address. Specifically, we're asking people to look up your state representative and your state senator. Everybody else is important, but for the cannabis conversation in Illinois, those are the 2 people you really need to know about. And so we're asking everybody to, 1, look up your state rep and state senator. And below on that document, we actually have an outreach script. And so you're welcome to use that to make a phone call, send an email, send a social media post, tagging them, again, finding a way to just engage them directly and saying, we need support for the Alliance for Cannabis Equity. We have this omnibus package. Really the direct ask is support the entire cannabis ecosystem and by passing an expansive cannabis omnibus package. It's tough because there's kind of a small handful of bill numbers. Because this is going to be an omnibus package, there's not like pass HB 123 and we'll move on. It's a little bit more complicated because the bill numbers are kind of kept secret by leadership. And so the other thing I will send to you, Cole, is the shared one pager that we do have that'll say like, update the badging language, with language from HB 1499. And then that way people can say, if somebody does ask, hey, but where does that language come from? It does live somewhere else. So I
Okay.
did just want to be clear. We have the script and everything. The bill numbers are a little funky just because, leadership is yet to put a bill number on it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, definitely send that resource and I can attach it to the podcast description for folks to use for reference. I think that's super important. I guess, yeah, just give you anything else that you think might be helpful. Of course, I would always recommend telling your friends and family to do the same. Um, Anything else that you can think of that we haven't mentioned so far?
Yeah, definitely friends and family make a big difference. But just generally, the cannabis community, we have a very unique opportunity here. All of us love this plant. We interact with this plant on a regular basis. We, as consumers, we are inherently political. And so I just really want to make a direct call out to all my consumers on the line. Um, Please make this worth it. Take the 5 to 10 minutes to send an email, to make a phone call, send a tweet and say, hey, Representative so-and-so, I really need to see you out in front on the cannabis issues. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. The other item on this piece that I failed to mention is for people who are business owners or aspiring business owners, I encourage you to reach out to the elected official in the district of your business. So let's say you have a brick and mortar shop that's not close to your house. Plug in the address for that shop because it's actually almost more impactful that you are speaking up because ultimately they listen to the tax revenue, they look at the numbers and they see, man, this person's bringing 15 jobs to my area. They're bringing all this tax revenue. I should listen to them. And so I want to make a specific ask, not just to the cannabis community, but to anybody who is a business owner, cannabis or not, plant touching or not. Everybody needs to make sure your voices are being heard on this because, again, you have something to lose on this. And so it's, again, really important that everybody, family, friends, next time you're in your rotation with your friends, please, ask them to take 5 to 10 minutes, think about these, critical issues. Because again, the time we dedicate now, the more we'll have to benefit in the end and, it's less work for us to do in the future. So work smarter, not harder.
Hell yeah. Well said. Well, thank you for breaking that down and for doing what you do to advance the cause, even if it's just, a baby step. It's progress, right? So thank you for doing what you do to advance the cause. I know it's I'm sure at times it can feel thankless. So uh more often than not, maybe. Um So, well, cool. Anything else that we should? I mean, we're going to be talking about basically all of those subjects, but before I just go crazy, um, and we go everywhere, is there anything else while we're in the pocket, so to say, that you wanted to mention before we just go everywhere?
I think before we get into everything else, I think just, making it really clear, like, as community advocates, we can only do so much. We can only, put as much, we can only put our best foot forward. And this is capitalism. This is, one of the most ruthless states to try and do anything in, especially on the business side. So, for folks who are curious, like, you guys have been at this for years. Like, why are things not changing? Like, I really just need, people to understand like the depth of the work that this is, like the minutia we're trying to move through in Springfield, the layers of bureaucracy, the layers of lobbyists that you have to talk to just to get to the sponsor. I really want to be like super intentional and just like calling out like how difficult this process is and just encouraging anybody who can make the time during a legislative session to drop into Springfield. It's the Capitol is a public building. You don't have to have an appointment. You can just show up, just see what it looks like, see what the rail looks like outside of the chambers. And just like you're gonna see, you'll empathize with us a little bit more when you see like, wow, this is really how this gets done. It's 100 dudes in suits, hawking down lawmakers, say, hey, you got to talk to me about this. I'm working on this bill for the pork producers, and this person's working on the bill for the police union. This person's working on a bill for ComEd. And you just get to see like really who it is that's doing the work. It's not like the class president growing up. It's not like, oh, this person has my best interest in mind. They really care about the community. It's people who get paid to pass laws. And so I want to be very clear that like we're up against a genuine opposition here. Like we have a lot of work to do. These are moneyed interests. You have the mix of like people who are invested in it and they have money on the line, but also you have an other end of members who are very conservative and don't even want lead to be legal in the first place. And so you have a mix of people, the vast majority of whom do not understand how this plant works, how the war on drugs worked, And so there's a lot of educating that has to get done. So before we jump into everything else, I did just want to share with folks a little bit of the vent session, like of seeing what it is in Springfield. You see under the hood of the car, and you would be amazed that Illinois is still driving forward, because this car is built on a house of cards, and you're like, man, we one pothole and this thing is going up.
Right. And I thank you for saying that, because it's not like we're only working on cannabis either, right? There's a lot of other interests. I mean, sure, like you said, there are moneyed interests behind cannabis, but let's just talk about other things in general. I mean, there's a new and vibrant gambling industry in the state of Illinois, right? Casinos and stuff are becoming more of a thing, and I'm just pulling stuff, easy stuff, but there, I'm sure you could come up with other things that maybe you've learned things from being down there that's like, whoa, I didn't even know that this was a priority for people.
Yeah. And I think one thing I would just quickly share on that is like, so when we were down there in 2019, May of 2019, to see this get passed, I just want to be clear, like when the week that the legalization law was passed, we passed legalization of cannabis, a massive sports gaming and casino bill. We passed the largest capital budget in Illinois history. We passed the Reproductive Health Act. We passed a huge debt repayment bill. And so, like, I want to be clear that, like, these bills got written in the middle of the night, got finalized, rubber stamped at midnight, and at 4 a.m., these bills are getting called for votes. People are not reading these bills. And it's not just cannabis, it's the gaming. It's literally all these other pieces to it. And so, like, being very direct with people that, like, y'all, when I tell you that, like, we didn't have a bill number for this cannabis omnibus, we still don't even have, real language yet from the lawyers who are drafting this bill. If we can't read it as advocates, we can't support it. And so, there's a separate conversation to be had about like how business as usual works in Springfield. Again, you have the lobbyists and everything there, but just like this mad dash to be like, well, it's the last week of May, we might as well pass these 8 bills. Like, wait. Aren't these going to have like long-term implications? And, should we read these? But, there's people getting much, that's a different pay grade than me.
Yeah, no, I kind of wanted to start there. I know it is much bigger than you and I, but that's kind of where I wanted to start. I feel like that's the story of politics. And again, I don't think we're going to solve that on this podcast today. But yeah, I was curious to hear your perspective of the process in 2019, because I got the same impression. It's like, this is rush. And one of the things I've asked many people is like, what, and people have different perspectives on it. And as you just said, the machine doesn't necessarily work this way, but why not take the time to get something right? And it just seems that, and it's not even just an Illinois thing. Like, it's the way the federal government works, where they throw everything into one omnibus that nobody reads. I mean, that's kind of the story of the Farm Bill, by the way. I don't think people really understood the implications. And now everybody's like, why the fuck is Delta 8 and CBD everywhere? And they're like trying to figure out how to control it. It's like, well, when people don't read the laws they sign into effect, like you say, there can be far reaching consequences. How do we
Absolutely? Yeah.
Again, I don't foresee us solving this, but I do just want to ask for giggles and grins. How do we solve the fact that our legislators are literally signing into law things they've not read and that have been drafted by other people, not by them?
Yeah. So there's layers too. I think one is like, there are some lawyers, there's some staffers in Springfield who are like genuinely like saints. There's some people that like I'm so like deeply in gratitude to, because like they make sense of a world that doesn't make sense down there. And so I have a lot of feelings about this. I think one thing I would say is like recognizing that Illinois lawmakers, legislators specifically, are not full-time employees. The legislative session runs from January to May. There might be a special session in October or November, but like maximum, they're working 5.5 months of the year. Like,
That sounds
so
nice.
there's one like, wait a second, I wish I worked,
Yeah.
half the year and got paid a salary and a pension and, got a company car, next time. But like, so I think that's really is to me like one of the main issues is like these people are not full-time employees. And I mentioned earlier encouraging people to come down to Springfield. Come down to Springfield in January or February. They literally don't show up to work. There's committee hearings scheduled, there's subject matter hearings scheduled on the calendar for months, and people just don't show up. March comes in, April comes in, you get back from spring break, and oh my God, now we have 10,000 bills to pass. And it's like, what did you do for the first 3 months of the year? And it gets back to, what did you do for the last 6 months of last year? What did you do all summer? Because, we made the point, we've been banging on the door like, hey, we should use the summertime to educate the lawmakers and to, get a working group together with a bunch of researchers and lawyers and draft the best possible thing. So come January, green light, we're passing this bill and ready to go. So it's definitely, I think the short answer is like, it comes down to these people not having full-time jobs with the state. And, obviously there's a lot of reasons why they're not full-time employees. I encourage people to look up the history of Michael Madigan and, his role as a tax attorney and like shaping tax law as the Speaker of the House and then turning around and working as a tax attorney. Like it was unbelievably flagrant, like how much, just like wild violations of the law and all kinds of ethics. But they don't care. And so I think my short answer to this would be like actually having them be like more like city council people where they're full time. They might have a month off for summer break, so they can give some time to their families. But like for the most part, these people have to get to work. Their staffers are busting ass and doing a lot of work. They do. When I tell you the labor they do goes completely unseen and unheard of. These people deserve all of the raises and benefits because they're the ones doing the work. These lawmakers don't write the bills. Most of them don't even read their own bills. And so it's really like calling out the need for genuine reform on like how we do business. So like moving to a longer calendar year so there's more time and process. But ultimately, it all comes down to like who's in charge. Status quo, business as usual. This works for those people who are in charge. And this is not just the Senate president and the Speaker of the House, but members of the executive committees, senior members of different committees. Like they're fine with this. Clearly, they're okay with this because otherwise they would have been out front and saying this is not okay. You go down there and there's a lot of chummy and just laughs and it's I get it, it's a workplace, you want to be friends with your colleagues, but like you see some of the way that they carry themselves and you're like, if people knew how dysfunctional our state government was, they would be up in arms and ready to tear this thing down. And so, yeah, I know I meandered that answer for a while, but yeah, I think moving to a longer term, a longer year term, trying to ultimately, get some of our, new leaders in positions of power ultimately so that things can be more transparent. Yeah. And ultimately like,
I don't think we should absolve ourselves of responsibility either. It sounds like many people are not holding their elected officials accountable if the case is that they don't show up to their job for half of the time. And I'm not trying to say that, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not all on, it's definitely on them for not showing up, but like, we got to hold them accountable too. Like it goes both ways type of thing. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be fair.
Don't hate the player, hate the game. Like it's a system that is like, this whole thing stinks to high heaven and it's on all of us. Like,
I think about how most people vote. Sorry for cutting you off, but I just think about how most people vote, and it's like you get really energized to vote, and then you just, as long as you know your person got in, you just kind of don't think about it anymore. That's how most people do it. And so, why would they show up if nobody fucking cares? I mean,
yeah, and that apathy is so real, and it's like it is very self-defeating that we're sitting here like, well, I voted for them, and you're like, well, they didn't do anything for you. Like you voted, you put your name on the ballot and, they turned around and lied, in Springfield, like on your behalf. Like, so I'm glad you called that out. Cause like everybody who's listening, again, this is on all of us. And like, all of us have to hold ourselves accountable. Like if you can't make the time to make a call, send an email, make a tweet, like I need you to get involved in another way. Cause like there's so many different ways to get involved. It doesn't have to be out in front in Springfield. It doesn't have to be, reading thousands of pages of legal text. Like there are so many other ways to plug in. But what I really just want to stress to people is like, find your lane, whatever you're most comfortable with. You love graphic design, you love social media, you love showing up in person and making things awkward. Like there's a lane for you in this space. And so I definitely just want to encourage everybody who's listening, like, please do not, again, the apathy is going to kill all of us. In this country, if we don't stand up and fight back for what is ultimately ours, this is our tax money they're spending. They're criminalizing our communities because they can. And so I'm really glad you called that out because this is the time. Like it's 2023. This country has been built for rich, a handful of rich people for 400 plus years. It's time we take this back for the people.
Yeah, and so very well said. Well, cool. Thank you for humoring me on that small conversation before we get into the bigger picture topics. So when it came to cannabis legalization in 2019, so it sounds like you were like kind of privy to some of maybe the talk around it. Do you recall discussion around um, well, licensing, transparency in licensing, and home grow? So I know I just threw three questions at you, but can you take those on?
Yeah, so just before I jump in, there's like, we were privy to some things, privy, not privy to other
Right.
things, and like, that's also how Springfield works, especially if there's a big group of community advocates, divide and conquer. Like, oh, I'm going to tell Peter about this, I'm going to tell John about this, and this person's going to hear about this, and so there definitely wasn't like one stream of information that was coming at
Mm-hmm.
that time. What I will say is like in terms of the topics you mentioned, so home grow, I'm going to start with that because our coalition was like home grow again. If it's legal, home grow is legal. Like we talk about something that's legal, like being able to grow a plant in your house is like the definition of that liberty. And we faced a ton of opposition. This was something, I encourage folks to look back like 2019 when the hearings were happening in Springfield. There was specifically one hearing I remember vividly that happened. It didn't start till probably like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. It was maybe the second to last week of that session. And I remember it was a member, a few chiefs of police, sheriff's offices, a member of the NAACP on the opposition table, and then the pro table was I think it was the ACLU and a couple of other like community advocates. But the whole thing was anti home grow. We need to create a surveillance program if people are going to do home grow. And like they were trying to track seeds. They were trying to make a surveillance program based on home grow. And we're sitting in, by that time we were, on the virtual room, we weren't privy to that meeting, but we were sitting there like, you can't be serious. Like, okay, if you're going to deny home grow, I get it. You're selfish. You have moneyed interests that are making you think that way. But like this whole like public safety side, and they were like, oh my God, we have to have a directory of all the people who have bought seeds. And like, they wanted everybody's names and addresses. And I'm like, why would that ever be acceptable? We let people buy, beer brewing kits at Target and go home and do whatever the hell they want. But the second that somebody thinks about growing a cannabis plant, like you're a drug trafficker and we need to, lock you up. And so that conversation was genuinely like devastating to hear back then because it's like this is not rocket science. People owning their
Yeah.
house and growing in their house. So that piece was really, really upsetting.
Do you
On the
remember
licensing side,
really,
oh,
really
go ahead.
quick? Do you remember hearing? Because I've got an article that backs up. I refer to it all the time. It's not like it's like one of my favorite articles that talks about this subject. And they talked about law enforcement being opposed to home grow, but it also says licensed growers opposed home grow. Do you recall any like specific talk and from who that was from?
Yeah, I can't say any specific like if there's an individual or anything. I can confidently say CBAI, the Cannabis Industry Association of Illinois, the multi-state operators. This has been their playbook and recipe for a while. And so, frankly, my expectation it was always them kind of in alignment, like we shouldn't allow, these home growers in. But I can't speak to too many folks beyond kind of that existing group who was, they bullied their way through the entire conversation. So
Right. But I guess what I'm
my guess
asking
is they
is
were,
like,
yeah,
so it was like people in the police, like I remember people like there's even articles of law enforcement talking about like the slippery slope of home grow. And
yeah.
to your point, members of CBAI have signed on in other states to something they call the fallacy of home grow, where they opposed home grow and everything. So there's like some record, but what I'm asking you is just because it's always been reported in the papers, but it's like you said, since these meetings happened, but then it's just like vanished in the air. Do you remember like, and I'm not asking you to name individuals or whatever, but I'm asking you like somebody else besides the law enforcement saying, no, we can't do home grow, like it from the industry side?
Yeah, I think the main thing would really just be like the Illinois Sheriff's Association, Illinois Chiefs of Police, and CBAI kind of coming together on that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's what I've always heard. That was the case. So
yeah, the other thing is like there just wasn't that many. Again, at this point, we're talking about like late May of 2019. At this point, there was only a handful of people they were even like really give a microphone to,
sure.
and it was basically one of those three people. You're like, are you a Chiefs of Police, Sheriff, or are you with us with the CBAI? And it's like,
Yeah. And
and if
before
if
you,
not, if no, then good luck. And we have a good relationship with Representative Ammons down in Champaign, and she had her own legalization bill that ran in 2019, and she was wildly disrespected on the floor of the chambers. They wouldn't even let her make a comment about the legalization law that would pass. And her whole thing for 4 years since then is like, where's my homegirl at? Like, I've literally asked y'all for homegirl the whole time. I appreciate her consistency because she's like, this is liberty and legalization. Like, this is what it is. And so she's been a great thought partner with us to like, how do we figure this out? How do we move this forward? But ultimately, like,
I respect her
when I tell you,
principles. I've heard that she will not vote on a cannabis bill unless it includes homegrow.
Yeah. She knows what she wants, and I really commend her and appreciate her because like most of these lawmakers do not know what they want. They come when the check is this check is a little bit more than that check. I'll take the higher one. They don't have a backbone. They don't have an ideology. They have a LLC that they send checks to. And so I really want to call out like just the love that we have for her, the support that everybody in the Illinois cannabis community should show for her, because like without her, nobody was going to start this conversation the way we needed it to be. She was the one who framed this in like through equity and justice. And she was co-opted and ultimately silenced on the floor. But yeah, those are the kind of people like we have to look at like, man, this one principled person and homegrown still can't move. And like we have to ask ourselves why.
And for folks that want to hear Carolammons' speech that she gave after she was denied the right to speak on the bill, we will put a link in the podcast description. I have that entire speech. It's a great one. And she talks about the fact that she didn't feel the CRTA would end the war on drugs, which is a point you've made a few times now through this show. Really quick before we get to licensing and God, what was the other thing that I said? Homegrow, licensing, and something else. I'll try to think of it. It makes sense why homegrow passed.
Oh yeah, you asked about license transparency. Sorry.
Transparency. Thank you. It makes sense now why homegrow did pass the way that it did. If law enforcement wanted a database, they got it. They have access to the medical cannabis database. I've asked the state. They are allowed to query it if they suspect somebody is growing, and that's from the state. So they got their database, and that makes sense why we got what we got. And if you look in Missouri, they passed adult use. They passed cultivation for all adults, but you have to sign up for a registry. So it's interesting to see the culture around home grow, and we got to know if you're growing it. It's just like, dude. What I think that gets to is a bigger issue we'll talk about later, but I wanted to let you kick off on licensing and transparency, because those were definitely two big issues that went into the CRTA, and they continue to be big talking points. So how do you want to take on licensing first or transparency first? Like, what was the talk in 2019 that you recall?
Yeah, so let's start with the licensing piece. So I think like the licensing was always like pretty straightforward. They were like, we want to have a very basic program where these people can grow, these people can sell, these people can transport, these people can infuse. Sounded pretty generic, straightforward. Not a lot of details like bill language was ever really shared with us at that time. One of the things that we did call out back at that time was with the craft grow license, which ultimately was passed as is, with this whole idea of like the only new people who could grow weed outside of the medical patients would be these craft growers who could have 5,000 square feet. And what we found was just like an incredibly paternalistic, like, oh, well, we want to make sure people can get their hands dirty and like really build out the skills they need to be successful. And you like, stop. Like they were talking, they're talking about like empowering people and like, oh, we want to give people the support they need. Like, no, if you want somebody to learn how to garden and how to steward, like homegrow is right here. Somebody who was trying to become a actual licensed cultivator, who's trying to compete in this industry, like really trying to have like market share and really be a competitor. Like people don't need to learn how to get their hands dirty. They've been growing weed before. Like people know how this plant works. They've done it before. It's nothing new to them. And so, the license piece, there was, and we had a lot of issues with, I can talk about the dispensary, the way they rolled that out, the way they did. But like one of the main gripes we had was like, they just a very paternalistic like growing system, and ultimately like we got to look at this industry, again, supply and demand. Like if you don't have enough plants in the ground, this industry is going to fail. And so what we've seen now, fast forward a few years, we still don't have these growers up and running. Eventually, these dispensaries will all open, and there will not be weed for them to buy. And so, yeah, just like on the licensing piece, we had a lot of issues with how they were framing all of this and like how they wanted, again, this all to roll out. But the main thing that I should have started with is like order of operations. We let the existing multi-state operators, and at the time they weren't all MSOs, to do the, flip the switch. January 1st, they start selling weed out of their medical dispensary. At the same time, they got a brand new +1 dispensary they could open up anywhere in the state of Illinois. Many of them tried to move to the city of Chicago. Chicago was very open to them moving in. Our coalition actually started a community benefits agreement campaign to make sure those companies were held to a higher standard. But what I'm getting at here is like really like, why would you ever come out with all your dispensaries before you have more plants in the ground? And we created this rush, and again, obviously, legalization at any new state, January 1st, everyone goes, oh my God, we gotta be in the line to wait at the dispensary and all this stuff. But it's like there was very little foresight in thinking like, well, we're going to come out with all these dispensaries and then eventually we'll have growers on, like they'll figure it out. Like, no, you should start with the people who are growing literally the infrastructure that this whole industry is going to be based on, whether it's, again, like adult use smokers or not. Like this is going to be used as biomass, going to be used as infused products and everything in between. And so, yeah, I think on the licensing piece, it just really was like very problematic to us, like the way they scheduled all these licenses to come out. Because if COVID never hits, like you would have given out all of these retail licenses and then eventually gotten the manufacturing people open. And it's like, there was never, like, you could tell, like nobody was at the table like, wait, does that make sense? Like, should we have more products before we have more stores that open? So yeah, I have a lot of feelings about like how they kind of rolled out the licenses, but specifically the dispensaries and the grows were like the two most like egregious to us at the time.
And transparency. And then I'll have a few questions for you on licensing, but I wanted to talk to you about how you felt the conversation around transparency went. Because if I could set the stage, the main sponsors of the bill, Heather Staines or might get the names wrong. I'm going to say Representative Staines and Senator, I don't know, Staines and Cassidy. I'm going to get it wrong if I think it's Representative Cassidy, Senator Staines. I think that's right.
That's the one.
Thank you. Messed that up a few times. They said very openly at the beginning that transparency in licensing would be an objective, and kind of like the CRTA would not pass without some transparency in licensing. Just for some history, folks, if you're not aware of the history, you can check out episode 232 of the podcast, where we have citations and everything else. Not saying it's perfect history, but it's my research and analysis, right? So take that for what you will. But for folks that don't know, there's always been a conversation about transparency around the licensing, and it's because, frankly, lack of transparency can lead to issues. Let's just say you need to look no further than the casino industry and how licenses are issued with that, and how need to look no further than that to see what happens with regard to like if there's not transparency. Sorry, I'm having trouble saying what I'm trying to say here. And so that ultimately didn't happen. Like I don't know, you can't get a straight answer from the state who owns what license or who is behind any license. So I'm just curious, like what you witnessed with regard to conversations around that, if you witnessed anything.
Yeah, this was one of those challenges that like we were like, the principles, everyone was like, yeah, transparency, accountability, we should get to the bottom of who owns these licenses. But then when it became very clear that like the multi-state operators, unless you're a publicly traded company, we can't really see who owns you. And so that led very quickly to like, wait, skirt that, move that out of the way. We're not going to have full transparent, you're not going to be able to look up the principal officers on Google. Like, and so, yeah, we were defeated pretty quickly on that item. And it really, if I remember correctly, it really came down to like the existing operators were like, well, they shouldn't be able to see who we are. So they shouldn't be able to say who you are. And, I don't care if somebody is a multi-state operator, social equity, you've been impacted, like we should know who's behind the company. And it's not just cannabis, like every single, I might be different, but like I would love to know who's actually running these businesses and like actually behind these stores. Again, whether it's cannabis or not, because like people want, more than ever, people want to spend money at a place they think is doing good for the world and the community. And like, that should be easier. So yeah, we were definitely let down by the lawmakers at that time. It was really all, it felt like all about protecting, the existing operators and not about like anything to do with the new people who were coming online. Obviously, the way the licenses were structured, and you have people filing LLCs that that are very difficult to actually like get to who actually filed and owns the LLC. I have a lot of feelings about like how
Right.
license ownership works in Illinois, like the Secretary of State office, where we finally have a new Secretary of State. I would love for that website to be updated so that like we can actually get to the bottom of this, because there's so many shell companies, again, not just cannabis, that exist, and like we should be able to just know who it is that I'm spending my money with. Like, is this person actually, do they even live in Illinois? Like, come on, man, give me some help.
Right.
So, yeah, the transparency piece was definitely a big letdown. It's not something that was ever like communicated directly. Like, this is how it's going to work. Like, there wasn't a lot of public notice about it. It was just like very clearly like, oh, wait a second, this is how. Because and what the context I left out was the medical operators, when the legalization debate was happening, because they were medical operators, they didn't have to disclose who owned them. And so they were able to skirt that, knowing they planned to legalize and get first dibs and be the first movers and flip the switch before everybody else. They were, just to say, well, we're a medical dispensary. We're different. And it's like, no, you're not. You're going to sell it to medical patients the second January 1st hits, which has happened.
Yeah. You meant adult use, but yeah. Yeah. Sell to adult use. Yeah. I knew what you meant. Well, cool. Thank you for getting into that. That's a super important topic for people to know about. And frankly, transparency is key. I've heard it from our own regulators and regulators from other states that they rely on the public to report things. And it's like, okay, help me help you. Let's make this information transparent. And then we can meet each other in the middle there. But anyways, I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one. So let's talk about licensing, because I felt like there's a thing, and I only know you have opinions about it because I saw, damn, I put that Instagram post down. I saw you made a comment about limited licensing, but I do think it would be important. I did see a question on here. I know I'm bouncing around, but I told you I'd go buck wild at the end here, so bear with me. I saw a comment on your post, and I think it's a really valid comment. And if people didn't see it earlier, well, I wanted to make sure that we acknowledged it. So there's these list of participants, and this commenter says, for the sake of transparency, don't most of these entities work with or for MSOs? And that's been an interesting, and that might segue us into limited licensing, because Peter, like, I don't think you'll be able to answer this question either. I don't think we'll solve this one in the podcast, but like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, because it seems like in these press conferences, we'll call out the big cannabis companies, and we'll even say on this podcast, and I've did it with Scott, we'll call out CBAI specifically. Meanwhile, many of them are members, like even Scott himself is a member of CBAI. And I know you got to get along, right? I'm not throwing shade at Scott. He's a really cool guy, and I'd love to have him again. We're going to have him again on the show in the future. But I guess what I'm asking is, if you like, it seems like you agree on and I'm not saying you, but it seems like the group agrees on a troubling number of policy points with the big companies that they're also complaining about. And the one that I would start with, and the one I'm mainly referencing, is limited licensing. It seems like nobody, I mean, I know it seems like you do have opinions on it, which is awesome. I saw like a snippet of what your opinions are, and they seem to be in line with mine. But like, it seems like we've cut off our nose to spite our face by supporting the limitations on licensing. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely, I think a couple things. One, definitely glad that we could harp on this, because I actually didn't even see this comment, so I'm going to sink my teeth into this when we wrap up in a lot more depth. But I think the main thing would be like, so from the limited licensing standpoint, like just getting back to like context in Springfield, like when we even suggest the idea of moving away from the existing licensing structure, we are laughed out of the room.
Sure.
And so being very clear with people about like the way the structure, this is the whole thing is structured. So like, for example, we have the craft growers getting up to 14,000 square feet. Weeks ago, months ago, that was agreed to. Everyone's like, yeah, when these dispensaries are online, we're going to have to get them product, and that's where it's going to come from. Great idea. Everyone's like, 2 thumbs up, great. CBAI, back in February, kind of muddied the water, saying like, oh, well, we need this disparity and availability study,
right?
Which by law was required to come out, a year after all the licenses came out. Obviously, the lawsuits happened, and so the clock actually never started on those studies until last year. And so, for example, like one of the things we run into is specifically on the craft grow side, like we want as many people to grow as possible. We want this to be, something that if you have the skills, like come in and show that you can compete. Obviously, we're wary of what happened in Oregon. We're worried of what's going on in Oklahoma. Like there's a right, I want to, like, we don't want to blow it wide open entirely just yet. But like one thing that I would be clear about is like it's not even really up to us because again they agreed to the 14,000 and now all of a sudden it's the disparity and availability study.
Right.
And so like for something like that, it's not really like up to us. If it was, this whole thing would have been different. So I definitely want to start with that because that one is like very specifically like on the table and like actively being debated. What I would really kind of speak to is so I think specifically like on the limited licensing piece, I'm going to avoid infusers and transport because that's like very nuanced and there's a lot that we could get lost in. But like, so again, we talked about craft. So I think let's talk about dispensaries. And so for the dispensaries, one of the pieces of the CRTA was it creates this like arbitrary number of 500 dispensaries that the state could like come out with at any point. That number is not based on like data. It's not based on population. It's not based on how many adults are in Illinois. It's not based on tourism, increases and stuff like that. And so we run into this thing on the dispensary side where it's like, who even set this? Like, it's completely arbitrary, totally like not set in any kind of data or anything like that. And so the other piece I would add to like, being for, a more expansive licensing, like the lawmakers, when I tell you very clearly, like they think that's like a golden number. And I want to make sure I might have misrepresented the 500 number, but I'm pretty confident it's like hovers around 500 that the state could like totally come out with. And we have like about 295 of those have been allocated so far. Only the first 110, the medical dispensaries and the plus ones are all open. I think we have 6 social equity dispensaries open. So we still have a long way to go for all the people who won licenses last summer. To even get open. And so I think the main thing I would say to this is like, yeah, it's definitely one, it's not up to us. Like if it was, we would have passed all this stuff years ago. But
Sure.
2, like they're coming back to like these arbitrary numbers. And obviously the disparity and availability study, it's the law. I don't want to call it arbitrary because we'll get sued.
But I get what you mean. Like why are they calling it out? Like a lawmaker or a regulator should be calling it out. What business do they have? Right. I mean, seriously.
Yeah. And if
I can tell you what business they have, but anyways, sorry.
Yeah, that part. But yeah, like that piece is really important and just calling that out, like, again, because this was agreed upon. We talk about canopy space going back 6 months. Everyone's like, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. All of these dispensaries need products. Go ahead.
I want to say I get it. Like I get that perspective. Like Scott kind of said the same thing. I asked him, why are you only pushing for 14,000? I've talked to people in the Department of Agriculture, like a lot, there's more than one person at the Department of Agriculture that is like, why aren't they pushing for more? They've asked me that. And I'm like, I don't know. But he made it clear to me. And it's kind of to your point that you just made. 14,000 is already written into the law. We're not coming up with anything new. We're simply adding clarification that would allow us to and would enable us for success. Right. Totally get that. And I want to like, please keep bringing that up because it is an important fact. But I just like, you did just kind of demonstrate for me what I was just talking about. You said like, you like started saying you're like, what I felt like you did what I started with, you said, we need to learn from Oklahoma and Arkansas or Oregon. Thank you. Arkansas is just legalized medical. So it's not that one. And that was, I felt like an underhanded way of saying that you do support it. You said, I don't want to go buck wild. And I'm not saying that Peter's views on this are everybody's views, but I'm saying that you're not alone in thinking that. And I feel like that is the crux of this issue, because if you think about it, like I don't even know, do you have a craft license? Or are you like involved
I've
No?
never applied for any licenses, and I don't intend to.
Shit, I would have thought maybe you were because you were talking about some of these things. So even better. But like, my thing is like, let's say that you work with somebody that has applied for a license and they're like really frustrated right now, and we give them what they
Mhm.
need. Right. Let's say that everything that you've asked for at the beginning of this podcast happens because the people saw the light. My thing is, there is a whole, and you even kind of said this today in the press conference, the cycle that continues, there's a whole new group of people. And so they're just going to be in the same place that actually even kind of in a tougher place, you know, um, to get action on that. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with the license limitations. Like, I just feel like, again, we've cut off our nose to spider face. If the goal was to legalize it, um,
Mhm.
it feels like that. So really quick, I wanted to share this point as well, since you brought up Oregon. I actually interviewed this guy, but this is just a small snippet that I think is interesting given like what we just talked about, right?
Do you look back at it and think maybe we should have put some caps on production or on the licenses?
You know, my job's not to second guess that. I'm just the administrator. But if you're asking me, I don't think so. Everyone just wanted to be the first in, to have their stake in it, and they were willing to take the risk to be a part of that market. So I don't think that's necessarily bad. And in a control market, they'd be left out. They'd never get that chance.
That's where I'm coming from. And it's like, I get what you're saying. And I know that what we've seen in these other states, they've happened. You're not wrong. But here's my question. Are we setting ourselves up for competition by limiting competition? I feel like the
Mhm.
way to do it is to expose yourself to competition, dude. It's cutthroat. And when this shit's legalized, you got to be ready, because we're doing it at a state level right now. Sure, we're kind of padded, but I don't know. That's kind of my perspective on it. It's like, I wonder, you know, are we setting ourselves up kind of for failure by padding the ecosystem? Because you look at other industries, it seems like cannabis is pretty unique in that it welcomes these limitations. I said this to Scott, you know, that we just accept the fact that 80% of restaurants go out of business in the first 5 years. I mean, the
Mm.
tech industry, it's widely known and accepted that the tech industry, Silicon Valley, people go there and their dreams die. It's widely
Yeah.
accepted. Some people make it through, you know. Fitness industry, you can start a gym or a yoga studio. Good luck standing out, especially with Planet Fitness and all that shit taking over. It just feels like, um, okay, let me put it this way. I think it is fair to say, I'll give ourselves some credit here. I think it's fair to say that this process may have yielded a higher proportion of minority participation, right? Because if you look at the numbers, the state shows that technically now, if you look at the license holders, even though they may be provisional, there are more people of color that have licenses than white people now.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's fair to say that we kind of accomplished a goal there. I got to give credit where credit is due. Here's the but, though. I just don't think it's really impressive when you consider we've only handed out less than 300 licenses, and many of which, like I said, remain provisional. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm all for guaranteeing their success. We're working within the confines of what we have. It just seems like we're short-sighted. We're just focused on what we can do to get the bag instead of like focused on actually addressing the issue. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
No,
know
I definitely,
I'm
I'm really happy that we're having this conversation, because like this is, people don't press this specific conversation in like in depth like this. And so this is definitely very much needed. And so I definitely, yeah, like there's pros and cons to all this. I definitely kind of alluded earlier, like as a consumer, as an advocate, like individual who loves cannabis, I'm
right.
all for open markets.
Sure.
As an advocate who has to like manage a lot of different people, organizations, authority, and people like that, we have to bring everybody to the table and make sure every voice is heard. And so I think what I would say to the piece you brought up, specifically the video from Oregon, like I think our piece is, our goal is everybody who wants to compete should have the opportunity to compete. But the one thing I think where Illinois is a little bit more unique is that Illinois made a specific promise to these entrepreneurs, those people who have been impacted directly, that we're going to make sure this works for you. And so this is not a defense of limited license. It's more so of a defense of like all of the structural support people need. So the funding that was supposed to come from the state, that a penny, like money has not come from them, that still has to be addressed. All the technical assistance that was supposed to be provided that wasn't provided, like people have been languishing for years, like without any support. And so I think my main thing on this piece would be like, we just want everybody to get a fair shake. And when we say fair shake, we're not talking about like the kind of more ruthless capitalist side. Like we're talking about like, hey, this is capitalism. People are going to have to sink or swim, but also like the state made promises they've never promised anyone else ever. And we have to come good because like they literally haven't done any of that. And so like I think, you know, we're between a rock and a hard place here because like there's no right answer. You can hear me kind of jumping on both sides of the fence. There's positives to take away. And so I think from my perspective, again, as a consumer, I'm with it. Like, let's get more grows out, but like we just have to be very intentional in that making sure that we're giving these folks the support. Because what, you know, and you know, really one of my concerns is that if we did, you know, come out with a bunch more licenses, and we're not giving people the support they need, you know, what we've already, you know, beginning to kind of predict is that the multi-state operators from other states are going to buy those folks out in pennies of the dollar. In, you know, in a year or two, we're going to have, you know, an industry that's even uglier. And so, you know, we don't want to chase ghosts and stuff like that and do things that aren't, you know, pressing concerns right now. But like that is something that we have to be mindful of. And so, yeah, there's no real short answer to it. But like, you know, we can, you know, we know also like this, Illinois is one of the biggest states in the country. Yeah. If we really leverage tourism the way we could be, like the cannabis and tourism specifically, actually, I need to say specifically, like we can, you know, we can go crazy if we want to with this industry, but the way this is set up is it's not set up for these folks to be successful. And I think the really the main point that I want to get at that goes beyond licenses, like how many, the quantities and stuff like that, is the taxes. It doesn't matter if we have 10 grows tomorrow or 1,000 grows tomorrow. Like consumers can't afford to spend money on this plant in these, you know, regulated shops. And so is there like enough revenue for these companies to even be made? Like I have serious questions because, you know, again, this is one of those short-sighted things where it's like, yeah, 35% sounds good to you. Good. Yeah, cool. Great. 4 orange whips. And like, that's not how math should work. It's not how tax, you know, should be set up. So I know that's a long-winded response, but yeah, I think tying into taxes is really key to this as well.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for bringing that up because that's another point. Like, I mean, Scott made it clear these craft products are going to cost more. They're not going to cost less. I mean, maybe we'll see the price floor drop from the bigger operators to fuck with the new smaller operators. I wouldn't be surprised at all because they've shown they can offer lower prices in other states. This is an example I gave the other day. Somebody gave me this cartridge. It's on sale. I don't have to say it, but you can see whose cartridge that is. It's on sale in Illinois. And it would cost, I think, $120, and that's before taxes. That would be like if you're a medical patient, you'd walk out paying $120. In Michigan, the reason they just handed this to me with like, no, this costs $30. This is a company that is operating in Illinois, and they can obviously afford to offer this product for this price, but they're not because they don't have to, because they view limited license states as investments. And frankly, I get what I mean, so you just said it finally. And I want to be mindful of our time. I know that, you know, you just got home and stuff, so we'll wrap pretty soon here. But you just put it perfectly, and I'll return to the video shortly. But it really centers around the industry interests, right? So the split here, like you say, you kind of were talking on both sides. Like as a consumer, everybody loves better prices or, you know, lower prices. As a business person that's trying to make money off of it, I don't like lower prices. So to your point, and to that point, I just wanted to show this quick moment here.
Of course, there's one group of people who would never complain about weed market competition. People who like cheap weed.
I just bought a pre-rolled pack of joints for $16, and that is like something I would have never dreamed of.
It's great. I don't think about the expense anymore, which is super awesome, you know?
Right. So I don't have to keep going, but like, that's kind of what you just put in a nutshell, is like, that is the paradigm. I feel like that's the two sides of this issue. Like consumers love it, but it makes it really hard if you want to be in the business. I mean, and I'm not like faulting anybody for that. I get it. It's just like, if I could put it bluntly, and then we can move on to my last topic that I wanted to discuss with you that I think you're going to love. And I'd love I don't know. I'd love to hear. I don't feel like enough people talk about this. So, but yeah, the whole licensing thing. It seems like that's the issue there. So
Yeah. And and I think, I just really want to like think into that, because it's just being really clear. Like, again, the nuance and the layers to this are very, really complex. The coalition, I think this is where also like we're in a very unique perspective. None of our leadership team are applicants or on any ownership teams. None of us have any vested interest in this, other than getting people to work, getting people into ownership, and like as consumers, maybe we can benefit from that. But like, this is not like this. We are one of the few voices that's like, we're literally not in this for any kind of money. And so I think that's where like our goal is, keep bringing people together, because like if all the people aren't together, specifically, and I'm talking about the business owners, like this, like they're not going to listen to anybody down in Springfield. And so it's a real challenge. And this is, also one of the reasons that like I'm so passionate about social consumption. It's just like the one way to cut through all of this shit is by opening the consumption lounge, where somebody can bring whatever cannabis products they want in a safe, ventilated, secure area, and we can all enjoy ourselves and benefit from the plant. So it's just shameless plug for consumption, because I'm like, we can just ignore all that and just skip to that,
Absolutely.
If it could
Absolutely.
be so simple.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for mentioning that about CEIC. And I just wanted to say, Peter, thank you again for your time today. Still got another topic, but the reason I knew we wouldn't, it's not like I expected to solve these issues today, but I knew I could get deep with them, because frankly, I've not heard good things about you. I've heard great things about you. So I knew that.
I was so worried. I was like, oh my God, do I have to throw the Zoom out? What about?
Yeah, no.
I've heard,
sorry. I wanted to save that line because I didn't want to scare you, but I've heard really good things about you. And I knew that we could get into these topics and that we would have productive conversations. So thank you again for your time today.
For sure. Thank you again. Appreciate you having the, even sharing the platform with us, but also just talking about this consistently is very much needed. And we can just keep up the good work.
Yeah. So the last topic I wanted to talk about today, and I just want to see it become a point of conversation, because it like I was so happy to hear you, because I was like, oh shit, somebody's on it. I've heard you say it a few different times, but when you talk about it's legal, but it's not really legal, like it's something I've been talking about since I started the show, and it's always stuck with me. Like, is it legal or is it not legal? Right. And so one of the things that I finally figured out in our deep dive on history is like what exactly the CRTA did, and more importantly, what it didn't do. And are you familiar with the Cannabis Control Act of 1978?
To some extent, not as much as the CRTA, but to
sure.
some extent.
So the in a nutshell, it provides a wide latitude in the sentencing discretion of courts and establishes penalties in a sharply rising progression. That's a long way of saying that the more weed you get caught with, the more trouble you're in, right? Yeah. And frankly, all the CRTA touched, as you know, because you're familiar with the CRTA, is the 30 grams or less, the 5 grams of and so we still have this idea of a possession limit. And frankly, it's still scheduled. That's one of the things I love about the Cure Act, is that it's going to if passed into law, it would deschedule psilocybin, which would effectively treat it like tomatoes, which is how cannabis should be treated. And I want to be clear, that's another thing that we're dealing with, not only the politics, but like earlier this week, actually, I saw Maine, they've got a really progressive bill, and it says treat cannabis like tomatoes act, and it basically repeals all the grow limitations, all of the license limitations, and just, hey, it's like tomatoes, you can grow it, you can sell it, if all that stuff. And so but I listened into the session, and one of the concerns the lawmaker had is that they couldn't do that because it would still be on the state's scheduled list of drugs. And so what they needed to start by doing in order to make that an actual reality is deschedule it. So it was a weird case where he was like, look, I support what you're trying to do here, but you're doing it wrong. It was so weird. It was so weird to say, or to see. And I guess that's how I wanted to, you get what the point I'm trying to make with this is that we didn't fully legalize it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd love to see that added to. I know that you're working with bills that are crafted right now, so that's what you're referencing, and that's why you're pointing to that. Edie Moore made that point today. Like, look, it's not like we're just this is a random wish list. Like, we're pointing to language that's been drafted that the legislators, we know it's got the support for, and that's why we're talking about this today. So I wanted to say that to to give you some space. It's not like I'm like coming at you like, why the fuck aren't you talking about this? Right. I understand why you're not talking about it. And I understand that you actually agree with me on it. But I wanted to bring it up just in case our listeners didn't know, and in case you didn't know, but it sounded like you had a vague awareness of the act already. So
yeah, and I definitely just appreciate you calling that out, because like that's one of these things. Again, weed's legal, but it's not legal. Like I say that anytime I can publicly. We had, the reason I was late for this conversation was we had, a Know Your Rights and a political education teaching, and that's how we start. Is hey, everybody, we quiz. Can you go outside and smoke a blunt on the street right now behind me? Like, and let's quiz people and ask what they really think. And the answer is a big fat no. And like making sure people understand, like, just because it's not legal, and like, yeah, this is definitely, one of the things that we're really passionate about trying to advance in the future. And like, again, this has to be clarified. I have a bunch of family in New York City, New York State. You can have up to 3 ounces. I'm like, man, if you're gonna have a possession limit, that's all right.
Yeah.
But like, I agree. Like, moving this towards the tomato model of like, if I have a patch in my backyard, like, let's make this happen. And again, normalize it. There are safe ways to embrace this. The only way we're going to make this less safe is through prohibition. And so by embracing this and having open, honest dialogue about like, what does home grow look like? What does, community growth look like? How do people actually start to grow? Like, it's really important. So yeah, this possession limit piece, this is at the root of everything. Like,
and I'm curious that
Go ahead.
that one bill that you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned it earlier. You definitely mentioned it earlier in the show, but I know you also mentioned it at the press conference. That would prevent people from getting in the industry, the badging thing, if you have a cannabis offense. Does that, like, sorry for the pop quiz question on that proposal, but does that proposal, would it, like, I guess because the Cannabis Control Act of 1978 is still largely in effect, and if you were caught with more than 30 grams, would you still get a mandatory disqualification if that happened? Or would this bill make it so that cannabis related crimes are not a disqualification?
So this is where I'm going to add more complexity to it. There's actually 2 different bills. One is Senate Bill 194 from Senator Peters, which is specifically for folks who want to own a license. And that specifically calls out nonviolent offenses. I have a lot of feelings about that. We know that, a violent offense is you getting stopped with weed and you had a knife on you, you had a gun on you. You could have you could have a valid FOID card, but because you had weed, now it's unlawful use of a firearm. That's a violent offense. On paper, it sounds like, you shot up a school, but in reality, you literally had a gun and you had weed. And so, I think the main thing would be, my understanding is that it wouldn't be an automatic disqualification unless you had something with you. If you had a second substance, you had cocaine on you, you had, let's say you had a gun on you, that would end up being what turns you away from the industry, unfortunately. But like, our goal, just from the coalition's perspective, our principles are like, everybody needs to be made whole who was harmed by the war on drugs. Again, the people who built this legacy industry, they had guns, they had knives on them, the same way that security drivers have guns and knives on them when they're transporting, legal cannabis in Illinois. And so this piece is definitely, I have a lot of feelings about it, but the main thing is, if we can get at the very least, we can secure, the ownership and the workers being able to, like, having a very clear badging process, a very clear appeals process if they are denied. And ideally, to your point earlier, like, yes, we are working on things that are already drafted, but like, if we can work over the summertime and like really figure out like, what does it look like for like full decrim? Because I'm also very passionate about is like making sure young people who we see are like bearing the brunt of most of the enforcement. Like, what are we doing for people under than 21 if you're getting their if stop for cannabis? Because like, if we're sending these kids to jail or putting them into any kind of like school to prison pipeline, we have serious issues with that. Because again, if we're going to legalize this, that means the next generation should not be harmed in any way, shape, or form. They need to be fully at the decision making table. Whether they want to work in the industry, they want to own in the industry, they want to get invested in hemp, like, this is this is the next generation. Like, they need to be at the table. So I know it's a long-winded response to, you brought up possession limits, but yeah, I just they didn't even really try on the decrim.
Yeah. I will throw this in the podcast description as well. I wanted to give some more context for people, just so that, like, because I love the ideas, and we've agreed on a lot of these ideas, but I can't take credit for all of them, and I'd love to give credit to where credit is due. So I've been trying to be better about this. So a lot of my ideas about, limitations on licenses and stuff come from this paper from Shalene Title, a University of Illinois alum. It's called Bigger is Not Better, Preventing Monopolies in the National Cannabis Market. I'll put a link to this in the podcast description. But if you'd like to see like where I'm coming from, folks that are listening, these proposals that she have, which includes the idea of not capping the number of business licenses available in total, but limit how much of a market one person or entity may control, right? To prevent a monopoly or an oligopoly. So I wanted to give background and credit where credit is due so folks can do their own research, on where we are coming from, because I know we were agreeing on some of these things on these policy points. So
For sure. And yeah, just encourage everybody listening. Like Shalene is a thought partner you need to listen to and read from. Like she's been through the ringer in Massachusetts. She's obviously a native of Illinois. So she's been able to see, she's a very unique perspective on how this all works. And, definitely encourage folks to check out her work. The Parabola Center is doing some great independent research that we desperately need. If we had someone like that in Illinois, this whole thing would look a lot nicer, look a lot cleaner. At the very least, there'd be an adult in the room to be like, these people are corrupt, and these are who you need to hold accountable. Because when we make that point, it falls on deaf ears because there's just, we're not the authority, unfortunately, because we don't have those credentials. So definitely encourage folks to check out everything Shalene's working on and support her work.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'll close on this topic. I've got one more like credit to where credit is due. But I wanted to ask you, and I'd be happy to queue up Bernie Sanders' answer to this as well. Because if you asked me this, dude, I'd be like, come on, dude. This is a tough question, and maybe for you, you're gonna be like, this is a fucking home run because it's in our name or whatever. But what is the difference between equality and equity? And again, if you want to bunt to Bernie Sanders, I can cue that up to see what he said. Because when I saw him asked it, I was like, damn, that's, I don't know. So what's your take on that one?
Yeah, the main difference is like equality is like, kind of this principle that we should all be equal and have equal opportunities. Equity is like, what are we willing to do and what are we willing to sacrifice to actually ensure that? And so, yeah, I know that the great senator he's put it a lot more eloquently than me, but like, it's really about like, how much are we willing to do the work? How much are we willing to get to the bottom of it? Because like equality sounds great on paper and, it's all over, the American flag and Constitution, equality, but it's like, this country's not equal. It was never meant to be equal. And it would never be equal until we start to actually hold people accountable, hold ourselves accountable, and work collectively to actually ensure, real community equity can be delivered. And in the context of cannabis, that means, holding the state to all the promises they made around decarcerating people, prioritizing those who are actually, frankly, traffickers, like people who are literally doing what these businesses are doing today. It means having those folks at the table so that we can right size this industry and make sure that, the training wheels that we can build are actually effective and the parameters that, people have to stay within are actually, rooted in science and safety. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will just briefly, for folks that want to see it, I'll play the Bernie Sanders clip here.
With all the emphasis on DEI, are we confusing equality of opportunity with trying to guarantee equity in outcomes? Okay, that's interesting because I think this word equity has come into the language in the last few years, and before that we didn't hear it a lot. And I think a lot of people hear equity and they hear equality, that like it's the same word, and it's not the same word in the same concept. So how would you differentiate between equity and equality?
Well, equality, we talk about, I don't know what the answer to that is. Come to think of it, equality is equality of opportunity. All right? We live in a society, we want all people to have whatever color your skin is.
Equity, I think, is more guarantee of outcome, is it not?
I think so. I think that's
okay. So which side do you come down
on? Equality.
Equality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So that's his perspective. And I would have said the same thing. I don't know. What would have been my first answer. But I didn't know. I don't know. I'm not refined enough to know. And I'm just, getting young, trying to learn these things, equality of outcome and what this means. I think it goes back to like these ideas of affirmative action. Right? Am I right in thinking of that? Sorry, again, I'm out of my understanding, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's really like,
Likely.
yeah, the equity of outcomes is like a really good way to frame it. Like, we can give people the opportunity to get put their best foot forward, but we also can't guarantee that, the ground in front of them is level and permanent. And so it's trying to, right size those outcomes. To me, it's trying to right size those outcomes, trying to build a structure so that people can actually, live and sustain
Yeah, I was trying
as
to
well
look
as
up and
possible.
make sure that I didn't say the completely wrong term. I was like, oh gosh, did I say like something that's totally wrong? Um, looks like I was a little bit on target, but yeah. And then the last credit where credit is due, breaking points. Actually, Shalene was on this interview, which I'm only going to show like 15 seconds of, because that's all I have of it, and we're about to wrap up. But I think this is important too, and this is kind of where my perspective is coming from on limited licenses. So. Gonna restart that. I apologize. Thought I started it and I didn't.
The answer to how to keep profits and prevent competition in the market is
limited licenses.
Limited licenses and
limited license markets. Why go play in a knife fight when it's easier to go sit at the beach?
In other words, they'll use the law to give themselves monopoly.
You, Jamie,
and so this is where I wanted to kind of dwell on that again, just to say for anybody that's still listening right now that I really think that if you're concerned about your future image and you're in the cannabis industry, like get far away from the idea of supporting limited licenses. I don't know. I just feel like it's not going to look good in the future to have proudly worn it on your shoulder. And I'm not saying you did it. I'm literally speaking out to people right now because I know plenty of people that are just like, they'll say things like, we don't want to dilute the pool. And, I get it, but it's like, it seems like it's not going to end well, especially with some of these policy proposals that Shalene has brought to light. So thank you, Peter, for allowing me to kind of get on my soapbox on that topic today.
No, I definitely appreciate it. This is like the most, I've had a chance to talk about this in a few weeks. And so like, again, I appreciate being, talking about this and challenged on this. Cause like, this is something that, we need to be honest about. And like, this is where I would make a call out to everybody like listening, like this summertime, this is our chance to be like, hey y'all, this whole idea of limited licensing, like they need to understand how backwards it is. They need to understand, the whole piece you brought up about the restaurants and gyms, and like, we let people fail all the time. And I know I mentioned earlier, like we're trying to create some safeguards so people, can actually get the best chance to succeed.
Mm-hmm. And
so,
I do want to say really quick that I think we should keep some of those equity goals intact. Like the idea that, and I asked Pam Altoff about this. She actually taught me, and maybe you can correct the record if she led me astray, but like she told me, because I said, maybe instead of limiting the licenses, we open it up, but we make it so that non-social equity holders pay into like a social equity fund that social equity licensees could use to capitalize. Because the whole thing is like, it's not that. Here's the thing. If we're saying these people were affected by the war on drugs, what you typically gather is that they don't have investors, that they don't have funding and everything else. And so that's what you need to get them. And that's what's funny is that we're like running up against that right now. Then these are people that are actually like, I don't know. I'm not saying they are by the color of the law, social equity, but I also want to recognize that they are better. Like they're in a good spot, many of them. That they could be in a better spot is the point. And so like, that's where it's like, I feel like, what can we do to actually get money in those people's hands,
Yeah. And that's definitely like, this is where, especially over the summertime, like we need as many thought partners on this as possible. Cause it's like, what creative ways, legal ways can we do to do that? Cause not getting sued is important. But like, I definitely with you on all that. And yeah, this is like, again, this is the time, the summer is when things have to get done. Lawmakers don't consider something like unless it's been drafted and really put into their face, like with some like lead time. So like really encouraging folks, now is the time to get involved, get invested with us. This, and I definitely hear you. And sorry, the last thing I should say is like the idea of like social equity, like we all know, like it started with like maybe some good intentions about as like a buzzword, as like a catch-all for people, but ultimately we need to be truthful. And like, we are talking about people who've been impacted by the war on drugs, targeted and impacted by the war on drugs. And legally, we know what the disparity is. I brought up the disparity and availability study earlier in the call. We know the disparity. We know how many Black and brown businesses are open compared to the white-owned businesses. We know how much percentage of the industry the white-owned businesses own in Illinois. Because it's important not to just talk about, yes, we have a lot of licenses owned by Black and brown people, but the percentage specifically, and I want to talk about on the grow side, like on the grow side, the vast majority of the grow is still owned by these small handful of companies. And so the other conversation we need to have, and again, this is another thing for us to do over the summer, how do we redefine impacted by the war on drugs? Yes, the disparity study will come out. We all know what it's going to say because we know what the disparity study is, or the disparities are. But like, how are we going to refine that legally so that we can ultimately, make sure this program is getting licensed to the people who have been impacted? But ultimately, like, we need to, like, labeling and just language is so important. And we talk about social equity as this catch-all, and it's like, there are some folks who've got some real money and some real connections who are at the table, and it's like, you're not the same as this person. We can't kick them out from the table because that would not be appropriate. But like, we got to have a real conversation about like how much progress have we really made if we're still trying to define, well, have they been impacted? Have they not been impacted? Like, there's a lot of layers and complexity to this. And so, I would just call that out again. It's a very structural flaw. Like, we couldn't even say impacted by the drug war. We literally had to say social equity because that was safer. And so,
And now it seems like kind of a toxic kind of, you know what I mean? Like, you bring it up to certain people and maybe it doesn't have and I'm more conservative people, to be honest. It has.
Well, I know it from the other side, everybody who's like furthest on the more progressive side, from our perspective, we're over it because it's like, you guys are literally like, it's a Trojan horse. It's like social equity. And then you have, J&J Gambling and Land of Lincoln Gambling who are winning these licenses. And you're like, I'm sorry, what the hell is equitable about somebody who owns 1,000, gambling stores in Illinois to get a cannabis license? But
yeah, and thank you for bringing that up.
I'll take my own soapbox off.
No, it's okay. Thank you for bringing that up, honestly, because it's something that if folks didn't know, it's important to bring up. A lot of the people that are by the color of the law, probably social equity. They probably did live in an area or hired a number of people or whatever they did to fall into that criteria. But that's the thing. I just like, that's what I start to wonder. This is not unique to cannabis either. I've heard of like in the construction industry, people will like have their wife listed as the principal officer so that they're a woman-owned business, and then they get the contract, because it goes to WEB or whatever. So it's like, I wonder if we're creating like, why not keep it simple and just, because I get the idea, but it's like I'm not saying we have to disband it, Peter. I want to be very clear about that, because that's what it kind of sounded like I was just saying. Again, I want to keep these elements intact. Like, I like the idea of a license holder fee that would go to social equity people, and there should be a criteria. This is what we're talking about right now for those people that would qualify to be able to get those funds. So I'm not saying we disband these ideas. I'm saying we need to tweak them. And to your point, we can have that discussion this summer, and I'll help you a little bit, maybe, because I'm going to share your link in bio. We'll put this in the podcast description so that people can get involved. It looks like there's different ways to support the coalition. I just want to reiterate something that you said earlier, like, folks, get involved, but more importantly, try to think of like where exactly you can help, because I'm sure that Peter, that everybody's doing a certain thing. So if you've got your niche, get into it and try to offer that up. I just say that because it's not like, of course, the more the merrier, but you don't just want people standing around, right? So try to come in with a goal, right? That's there's your springboard.
Anybody is. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's like the perfect call to action. Yeah, there's a space for everybody at this table. We just want to know what it is you want to do, how you want to contribute, and there will be a chair waiting for you. We are very much open about like who's at the table, as long as you believe in this mission, and you're welcome to be like, especially if you're new to the space, like, we'll teach you kind of the ins and outs and how it all works. But like, as long as you're open to, learning and being kind of taught hands-on, as well as, again, just you're on board with the mission, like, we need everybody we can get. It does not matter where you live in Illinois. It doesn't matter where you live in this U.S. country. We have way too much work to do. We got to make sure all these other states learn from our mistakes and make sure they get right before it's too late. Because I'm looking at, Minnesota and Ohio and, Pennsylvania, the states that are coming down the line next, and like, listen to us. I swear, we're not trying to lead you astray. So definitely, I encourage folks to reach out to us. Again, just appreciate you sharing the platform with us.
Yeah, dude. And I just want to say thank you again for your time. And I hope I didn't misunderstand you earlier. Like you said something like getting challenged on this. I hope you didn't feel like I was trying to challenge you. I knew that we could get into these subjects because I've heard good things about you, and the people that I've heard the good things about, I know they tend to stand where I stand on those subjects. So that's why I was like, I don't give a fuck. I know we can get into this with Peter,
For sure. Yeah, definitely. No offense taken. I don't want to be, there's like a negative connotation. I as someone who's been in policy advocacy for like almost like as most of my adult life, like I enjoy having conversations like this. I want to always be at the table, and like, cause the more I can, you can ask a question like, shit, I didn't even think about that. Like as an advocate, cause again, especially you spend so much time, your head is in the sand. You're like, oh
yeah, dude,
these are all the solutions right here. And then it's like, oh fuck, it's a really good question. We didn't even think about that. So I definitely appreciate that. Yeah, definitely no hard feelings. These are the conversations that need to be had, frankly, like as open as possible, because people need to see and hear like what is actually on the table, why is it on the table, and how can community members affect ultimately what gets on the table, because we don't want to act like we're the end all be all. This is something we're building the plane as we fly it. Don't take this is not definitely like join us if you want to help us change this.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make sure to say that because I've really enjoyed my time with you today, and I'd love to have you back on the show anytime you want. But I'll reach out to you. But if there's anything that comes up like this where you like need the platform, reach out, dude.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do. I think probably we'll see where these next 9 days get us with legislative session, and hoping for the best. But again, appreciate you sharing the platform and all the work, man.
Yep. All right. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Peter as much as I did. We'll see you on the next episode of the Chillinois podcast. Take care, everybody.